welcome back to Confection Kitchen. This week we're going to be working on the elusive macaron. And so macaron is technically the official way it should be said. Macaroon is typically those haystack looking little cookies that are usually made out of coconut, sometimes dipped in chocolate, quite delicious. So those were typically referred to as macaroons. Macarons are the French style pastry or French style cookie that is just sinfully delicious. I had my first one at a store and I was like, I need to figure out how to make these because they're like $3 to $5 a cookie. And now after learning how to make it, I understand. There's some really key points into making this. The first is you really do need to measure out everything. You can convert it to cups, and I'm gonna post a link below that is the recipe that this is basically what I follow. I deviate a little bit, but for the most part, it's what I do. And I've read many blogs on macarons. And the thing that across the board is that it really is everything is measured out. Also, the other key point is to age your eggs. You'll see in most all recipes talk about leaving your eggs out. I leave mine out for a minimum of 3 hours. It's super important that you age your eggs. Time is your BFF. You have to have patience when doing this. This is something you definitely need to plan ahead. There's not like tips really and cheats for this particular recipe because they are so delicate and really anything can go wrong. I have made hundreds of these guys and not every time it works. So, you know, you really need to be patient and have time to do this and plan ahead. And the other thing is be light-handed. You really do need to be light-handed with all of your stuff. All right, so we're gonna talk about the ingredients. So for the ingredients, you're gonna need 200 grams of powdered sugar, 100 grams of almond flour, which I have. You're gonna need 120 grams of room temperature eggs, and these have been aged for about 5 hours. So aged is what I mean is I pre-measure all of the eggs in here to 120 grams and I let it sit on my counter. If I am gonna have a macaron order for somebody, I will typically leave it overnight on the counter so that way it really does have a chance to age, and that aging process is such a key in the macaron world. You're also gonna need an 1/8 a teaspoon. The only thing you can measure is an 1/8 a teaspoon of salt, which I have in my bowl here. And then I have 40 grams of sifted granulated sugar. And it sounds silly to sift it, but I really do sift it to make sure if there's any clumps in there, you want everything to be as fine as can be. You can use caster sugar or what's called pastry sugar. It's super duper fine. I have found it at stores. It is a lot more expensive. So I typically don't have it on hand unless I know I'm gonna be using it for more than one thing. But it's a lot of money for this particular thing. So I've always used sifted granulated sugar and it's worked out just fine. And then you have an option of doing a coloring or a flavoring. I'm going to be using a purple color today. So this is a Wilton gel food coloring. I got it on accident, so I was like, hey, might as well use it. I didn't really need it at the moment. So I'm going to be using purple for a little fun. All right, so today, and then the desired filling. So we're making the cookies first, and then we're gonna make a salted caramel frosting, just to die for. So this is my most popular macaron when I do make these. And we're gonna add a little bit of cinnamon on top later on that's gonna be our flavoring on top. All right, the stuff you're gonna need. You're gonna need a digital scale, and I think I've told you guys before I've gotten this at Greater Goods. It was on Amazon, cheap, had it for over a year now. Love it, it's perfect. And that's what I use to weigh out all my ingredients here. You're also gonna need a food processor or a blender. I've always just used a food processor. I found it a little bit more handy, but a blender will work. You're gonna need a hand mixer. I have tried to do this in a KitchenAid. I have yet to find good results. So if you can do it, great, but I'm gonna be using a hand mixer. Also, I'm gonna use a spatula, preferably a rubber spatula or a metal spoon. Again, we're trying to keep a lot of moisture away from this particular recipe, and this is a great non-moisturized thing. A wooden spoon can hold moisture from cleaning, from washing and stuff. So you want to do a rubber spatula or metal spoon, not wood. I have my baking sheets here, and I have silicone mats here for this one. So I have 2 with silicone mats, and then I have one that has parchment on it that I'll talk about a little bit later. This recipe makes 40 individual rounds, so about 20 cookies. And then I have my piping bag that has a Wilton tip. I think it's 2A. It's basically the bigger one, so it easily flows. And again, a metal tip to my bag. I have a dry, grease-free bowl, and that's super important. I typically will wipe it out with a paper towel before I start, and that's gonna be your mixing bowl. All right, so the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna pulse the powdered sugar and almond flour, which I have in here, into the food processor. So I'm gonna dump my powdered sugar and almond flour in. And pulse it. Okay. So what you want it to look like is just a very fine, ooh, it's kind of hard to tell, but a very fine texture and no clumps. So you want to pulse it to make sure that there's no clumps in here. And then we're going to set that aside and start on our eggs. All right, so we have our room temperature aged eggs, and I have my salt in the bowl already, and I'm gonna dump those eggs in with the salt. Make sure that gets all in there. And now I'm gonna start my blender on medium for 1 minute to get it started, and then I'm gonna do high for about 2 to 3 minutes. I'm gonna check, what I'm going to start to do is I'm gonna start to form stiff peaks. So that means that when I lift up my mixer, the peaks that that egg white forms is going to be stiff. They're not going to fall. It shouldn't move. And we want it till it's just stiff enough. This can make or break your end product. So it's really important that you find the fine balance between when it just gets to the stiff peak. You don't want to over whip your eggs, and then because that will break what's called the meringue of your cookie and not make for a good cookie. So we're gonna go ahead and start on medium. And we're gonna switch to high. Okay, so I'm kind of cheating a little bit, and I'm using the clock on my timer here to see how my things are. So if you notice, it's not even coming up on here, so I'm gonna have to do more. The peaks are starting to form, so, but I'm on the verge of breaking my meringue too, so I'll probably go for another about 20 seconds. It's starting to be stiffer, I don't know why, with the peaks, because you want it to so it doesn't move, like it doesn't, see how it's slow to go. So that is a good stiff peak that you want for your meringues. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna gently fold in our sugar. So I do about 1 tablespoon at a time. So usually, I'll just put it usually on my spoon, about a tablespoon, and then I will very gently and delicately fold it into my egg whites. All right, because I don't want to lose that beautiful meringue that I just made. So at this point, I'm gonna add in my coloring. Now, the link that I showed you below, she does typically blend it again, but I've noticed when I do that, it kind of breaks the thing. So I like to add it before I add the dry, and we'll just do just a couple drops. So I did 4 drops. Y'all can see it, sorry. And then we're just gonna very carefully fold that color. And we're gonna be mixing this a lot more once we get the dried ingredients. Oh, one thing I want to say about flavor is with flavor, I usually don't add flavor to this. You can find it on Amazon that they have flavor, but what I usually do is if I make a chocolate or an Oreo macaron, I have other recipes that I use for this particular one. This is just a straight macaron recipe. All right, so now we're going to gently, sorry, get used to my angles here. I'm gonna throw this in here, and then we're gonna gently fold it into the batter. And you really try not to do it. Under mixing is actually a preference here. You don't want to overmix. So if you notice, I'm just very slow, very gently pick it up, move it around, pick it up, and like I'm twirling my spatula to kind of help with that. One blog always said don't do more than 50 folds. I'm talking, not counting, and so I don't know if that's been 50. But I usually go, the hard thing about teaching with the macaron is that it is really all about feel and practice. And what you're aiming for is to get a nice, smooth, glossy, shiny mixture. Once you start to see kind of a shine to it and the smoothness to it, that's kind of when you stop. And it's gonna look sticky. So it's not a typical, like a lot of doughs, like cookie doughs, have kind of a girth to it. This one will not. It'll be very shiny and soft. Okay, so I'm getting a kind of a shine. Everything's kind of mixing together, and I don't want to overmix it, so I think I'm gonna call this good. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna let this sit out on the counter for 10 to 30 minutes, and I'm gonna start my timer for that. And this is part 1 of the resting phase. While we do that, I'm gonna go ahead and get my baking sheet set up and get my piping ready. And we'll see you in 10 minutes. All right, so 10 minutes has about passed, and my dough is nice and shiny and smooth, as you can see. So what I typically do is I'll take my piping bag and I'll find a low or a high cup, and I will try to fit my piping bag into it so it's a nice way to hold the piping bag steady for myself. When you're doing this by yourself, you have to find ways to do things by yourself, you know what I mean? So what I'm gonna do is now very gently, I'm trying to show you, very gently, I guess I should go to the spout, move my dough, kind of just inch it forward. If you notice, I'm not scraping it in, I'm just inching it in to where my bag is. Overfill it, so I'm gonna go ahead and just stop there. And then I'll put the rest in it after I'm done here. So once I have it ready, I'm gonna go ahead and pull it out and then unfold it. And the cool thing is, so you have all of this space to work with. So that way you want to fold it in once, fold it in, it's coming out again, and then that way, and then you can fold it down and fold it down, and it creates a nice way to hold the bag without squeezing, because you don't want to necessarily squeeze your like you just want it gently. Everything is gently. So so what we're gonna go ahead and do is, now I have these silicone mats that actually have 2-inch circles already. Because this makes 40, I don't have 3 silicone mats yet. Maybe someday I will. So I will use parchment. So what I do is I end up measuring out the holes. So I write on the back side of it. And then that way, obviously I'm not putting my stuff on the ink that I have. So I can still see my circles. So if you use parchment, I highly recommend, putting circles on the back of your parchment. Now, because this is a very delicate dough, I'm gonna go ahead, here, let me start back here, flip this around. And I'm gonna go ahead and start in the middle, and I'm gonna go vertically up, and I'm gonna ever so gently push down in the center, and then create a swirl from the center and push it out till it goes right inside my 2-inch circle. I'm not going to exactly the 2-inch circle. I'm going just inside of it, because it is going to spread out a little bit when it sits. If you do it exactly to the 2-inch circle, it's going to be a really big macaron. So if you notice, I'm just inside this circle. And I'm going to do it again. So all I'm doing is holding this over here so when it drips, because it's just constantly moving. Hold on, Josh. And I'm slightly curling this in and pushing that dough out. Do the same thing with the other cookie sheets. So if you're gonna do any type of decoration or flavoring or something on there, sometimes when I make my s'mores macarons, I use this particular recipe, but instead of flavoring it with graham cracker, I actually take crushed graham cracker and sprinkle it on. So today we're gonna be using cinnamon, so I have my cinnamon, and I'm just gonna very gently shake my cinnamon on here. And if you want to do sprinkles, you can do sprinkles. And to me, this is what creates a better flavoring of the actual cookie itself, instead of adding an artificial flavoring. Because I have tried doing artificial flavoring, like graham artificial flavoring, and it just doesn't taste quite right. So I prefer the real thing. So now that we're done, what we're gonna do then is, I always like to hold down the parchment or the silicone mat, and I'm gonna tamp it on the counter like so. I do about 4 or 5 whacks. But if you notice, it's hard to see, if you can see the air bubbles popping, you are trying to pop those bubbles. You want the air to escape, so that way it creates that really nice chewy texture. Okay, good. Whacked it pretty good. Think I feel good. See a lot of air bubbles coming up. So now we're gonna let these sit out on the counter for 45 to 60 minutes. This part I cannot stress enough. Everything is essential, but this is definitely imperative that you do this. This will allow the cookies to get what's called a dry shell on top of them, and that is what's going to help create the well-known feet of the macaron and the nice chewy crisp texture of the macaron. This too can make or break your cookie end result, so it's super important that you make sure that you let these sit out to dry. So in 45 minutes, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna touch one, because if you touch it now, it's pretty sticky. It sticks to my finger. I don't want that going in the oven. Now, today might be a little sketchy. It's a little bit rainy. It's a little bit more humid than it has been. If there's a lot of humidity in the air, a lot of moisture in the air, it's gonna be really hard to get these set up and dry. So you really wanna make sure you have a dry environment. That's gonna make the best macaron. All right, guys, so it's been about 45 minutes later, and what I did, because today is a little bit more rainy, a little bit more humidity in the air, I can kind of feel the moisture, I had stuck them under my vent and turned on my vent to help them maybe dry up a little bit better than if, let's say, it was a little hotter day. So when you touch them, they want to feel kind of hard, like a hard shell on the outer, so I can kind of rub them. There's no indent coming in. So that's what you're looking for, is like a harder shell on the top of them. These I did not have under the vent. So if you touch it, it's a little bit more, my kids are playing. It's a little bit more soft, there's a little bit more indentation. It's almost there. So I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna put these in last. Now I have preheated my oven. So the recipe calls for 325. I've never had luck with that. So I typically have gone to 350 for about 12 to 15 minutes. And I'm gonna literally cook one tray at a time. I've tried to cook multiple trays at a time, but I've always found that it's very uneven in doing so. So I'm gonna go ahead and do one. So set the timer to start for 10 minutes. When I test it, and I'll show you, is I don't want the top of the cookie to wiggle. So hopefully it's gonna raise up and have little feet. And that's what I'm hoping for in the next 10 minutes. And then I'm gonna do what's called the wiggle test and check it for 2 minutes, wiggle test. And if it's still wiggly, I'm gonna go down to 1 minute. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these in, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, so I wanted to show you guys, my timer went off for 10 minutes. All right, so basically my timer went off, and I was gonna show you, without burning myself, how I can kind of wiggle it a little bit so they're almost done. So I'm gonna give these probably another minute or so. Okay, so I'm gonna try these again, and ooh, without burning myself. Yeah, and these are not moving at all. So that means they're done. And if you notice, they have little feet on them, which is always a good thing. So I'm gonna take these out of the oven and let them cool on the baking sheet for at least 20 minutes. All right, so all 3 batches of the macarons had come out. And I wanted to show you, I let these cool for at least 20 minutes. When you let them cool on the sheet, it's much easier to come out. So when I roll it up, it should just pop right out and leave a nice smooth center. So if you notice, it still has the, it's kind of hard to get the things. It has its signature feet on there. And then one thing, so the silicone mat, if you notice, it popped right out. Now, these guys, actually I haven't tested, so we'll test together. Sometimes can be a little bit harder because of parchment, but because I tend to just slightly overbake these so that way they are firm, I should be able to just slice it right off. There have been times, even for me, that if I don't let them bake just maybe 30 seconds longer than they should, they get they still stay wet on the bottom, especially with the parchment, for sure the parchment. And they will stick to the parchment, and then I have to like use a spatula, and usually I end up destroying the cookie because they are still so delicate. They're hard to the touch, but if I just even squeeze it, it will break because it is so delicate inside. And also you want to make sure they stay cooled. So you don't ever want to take a macaron off a baking sheet that's still warm because it hasn't properly set. So let them cool in the pan at least 20 minutes before you start doing it. So now what I'm gonna do is For the most part, as you can see, they're pretty much all the same size. So now what I'm gonna do before we start our frosting is I'm gonna take these guys and I'm actually gonna pre-match them up. So that way I know that these fit nicely together. And then I'm gonna set them, sorry, do it backwards. Set them aside like this. So I'm gonna do that for all of them here. So like this one, oh, that's actually pretty good. And so that way they're all gonna be in pairs of each other. 36, so I should have 18 cookies out of these. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And then once I've done that, we're gonna go ahead and start the frosting. All right, so now we're gonna go on to the frosting as I've gotten all of my macarons separated out into pairs. And we're gonna be making a caramel frosting, which is too good. So you're gonna need half a cup of unsalted butter, and it's gonna be at room temperature. You're gonna need 1.5 cups of powdered sugar. So I have that here. You're gonna need 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and then you're gonna need 1/3 cup of homemade salted caramel or store-bought salted caramel. So I actually had made this earlier in the day, so it's ready to go nice and cooled down. All right, so the stuff that you're gonna need is you're gonna need 1 medium bowl, gonna need a handheld mixer, and then you're gonna need a spatula. So, I would not recommend making this in a standalone mixer because it is too small of a batch, it may not work. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna beat the butter on high for 1 minute. All right, so I have my butter all nice and creamy. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the powdered sugar and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And then I'm gonna beat that till it's all combined. All right, so now that it's becoming a little bit more smooth, you're probably thinking, doesn't it need some type of dairy or liquid? Yes, yes it does. That's where this golden liquid comes into. So we're actually going to dump all of that delicious salted caramel in with the frosting here.
That looks good.
Thanks, my lovely children. And then we're going to mix it together. Kind of like what we were folding it into, like with the macarons. So you're folding it into it. This one you don't have to be so light-handed, it doesn't really matter. And I highly recommend leaving the swirls because that's what's gonna give you that really nice caramel. So I didn't overdo it. I'm gonna probably leave it like here, and then I'm gonna put it in a piping bag, and then we're gonna start piping our cookies. All right, so I did my trick again with the piping bag, and I'm gonna dump my caramel into there, and remember I'm leaving the swirls in there. And it's not a lot of frosting because you do not want to overload the macaron with just frosting. I mean, I'm all for frosting, but it's good to try the cookie also. So, and a lot of times you can have fun with these. I make a s'mores macaron sometimes, and I actually make marshmallow frosting, and then I will drizzle chocolate on the inside and put graham crackers. And so I do sell these typically by the dozen for about $1.75 for a cookie. And in a lot of stores you see them for $3.25, and it's because of the process. So if you notice, I mean, to you it's been however long this video is, but for me, I've been doing this for about 3 hours. So what we're gonna do again, we're gonna curl it in so we have a nice good grip, and look at those delicious caramel swirls. Look at that.
Oh my gosh, that looks nice.
Okay, so. And then we're gonna do the same thing, kind of like we've done with the frosting. So you're gonna, I always start in the middle, and then I work my way around and slightly push right up until the edge. So if you notice, it's right at the edge there. And then I'm going to, with its other, so if you notice I have everything in pairs, I'm gonna slice it down and then just very barely push it so it creates that nice caramel macaron cookie. And I'm gonna do this for all of those guys. And I like using a piping bag instead of a knife and spreading it on because I have better control of the consistency around the cookie, and it's easier on the cookie because I don't want to smash the inside of the cookie. So I'll do this little tiny one. So again, you see the nice ribbon of caramel in there? That's what you want. All right, so this is the baking, the how-to and how to make macarons. I hope that you've learned something and you try it. They are finicky and sensitive, but if you get it right,
No, I want everyone. Wow.
so worth it.
I want to
Thank you guys.
I want to try.
Hi guys, so welcome to our bonus video. I'm gonna actually show you how to make that salted caramel that's gonna go into that frosting. I find that this makes the best salted caramel frosting when you do two different like do the frosting and then the caramel separately. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to do that. Okay, so what I've done here is so that way you can see it. So the ingredients that you're gonna need is you're gonna need 1 cup of granulated sugar, 6 tablespoons of salted butter cut up in 6 pieces. If it is unsalted, then I usually add about 1/4 tablespoon of salt to this particular recipe. You're gonna need a 1/2 cup of heavy cream and 1 teaspoon of salt. You're gonna need a medium saucepan and preferably a rubber spatula of some type. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna heat up our oven to medium, and we're going to pour our sugar right into that saucepan. Now this part's gonna take a while, but once it starts going, things are gonna move quickly. So even though it's not really hot at the moment, it's gonna start heating up. So I want you to constantly keep stirring your sugar until it starts to form clumps. You're gonna notice that once the sugar starts to get hot, it's gonna start to form clumps, and you're just gonna keep on stirring through those clumps until you get a thick brown liquid. All right, so as you notice, as it's starting to melt, it goes a lot faster, and you really want to keep this moving, because if you do not, your sugar will burn and you will ruin your caramel. So it's super imperative that you keep stirring. So it's going to be kind of two-handed. So now that all my sugar is melted and all those clumps are gone, and you get that nice brown caramelly color, ironic enough, now we're going to add in our butter, and it's going to bubble, which is totally fine, and that's what you want to have happen. And you're going to stir for 2 to 3 minutes while your butter melts. Okay, so now that our butter is completely melted, we're now going to stir. Sorry, we're now going to stir in the heavy cream. Okay. All right, and then you're going to let it boil for 1 minute. So I'm going to make sure it's all stirred, and then I'm going to let it boil. Okay, it's been 1 minute, so I'm going to turn off my oven. I'm going to slide it away from the heat, and now I'm going to stir in the salt. Okay, so now that that is all stirred, we're going to let it cool completely, and as it cools, it's going to thicken up and be a delectable. Sometimes what I will do is I will actually let it cool in a heat-proof glass, like a measuring cup. So I'll probably go ahead and just pour it in there so you can see at a weird angle. Oop, that's some sugar. All right. Try not to burn myself here. All right, I think you can see. All right, so now we're gonna let that guy cool. And this is your delicious salted caramel